Now, a plaque has been unveiled in Iceland to remember the first of its 400 glaciers to be lost to climate change. Okjokull glacier used to cover 15 square kilometres of mountainside. Now it is barely 1 square kilometre and less than 15 metres deep. It was officially declared dead back in 2014, but now we have this memorial which bears the inscription, "A Letter to the Future," warning that all of Iceland's glaciers are expected to disappear in the next 200 years. We're talking to Asad Rehman about this now, Director of War on Want, a global anti-poverty and climate justice organisation. He works at both the UN and with communities most affected by climate change. Nice to have you with us again, Asad. It's just on this particular issue, it's incredibly poignant, isn't it? I read that they've put this plaque here as a letter to the future and basically said to the people who ever find it in the future, you'll know whether we succeeded or not.
It is, and it's an extremely worrying sign. And actually, it should be a letter to our present because, of course, this glacier melting is one of the predicted outcomes of increasing temperatures. And the reason why the glaciers and generally ice at the Arctic and the Antarctic is so important is it reflects the sun's rays, and as the ice melts, the heat is then absorbed into oceans, then triggering more and greater ice melts. And we're seeing this pattern played out. If you look incredibly in the Arctic Circle, as the summer heat wave in Europe, we've had a heat wave also in the Arctic Circle, and we have 100 current wildfires being on fire at the moment in the Arctic Circle. And this is really shocking and devastating news because this is not predicted to happen in the timescale it's happening, and it's a real wake-up call.
And other places too. I've been reading about the Himalayas. How bad is it there?
Well, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, if you read some of the reports now, it's now predicted that 40% of all the glaciers in the Himalayas will melt. Now, just to put that into context, the glaciers are very, very important, not just in terms of regulating our environment and temperature, but they're also critical for human beings. Glaciers provide much of the melt for fresh water, and we already saw in India, in the Indian subcontinent this year, of cities running out of fresh water. It's now predicted of the 1.3 billion people, 40% of them will be without access to fresh water. Because what we will see is sudden either huge deluges of water, as in floods, as the glaciers melt, and then sudden dry periods. And it will impact on our food. It will, of course, impact as sea levels increase, as the melting ice flows into the seas. We will see a sea level rise, and it's now predicted up to 2 billion people, or 1/5 of the world's population, will be displaced from their homes, many of them, of course, with nowhere to go. And this is a reality that's happening at about 1.1 degree of warming. And scientists tell us that once we reach the 1.5, these kind of trigger points will become inevitable, and they will just start to speed up and it can't be reversed. And the shocking news, of course, is that we're on a trajectory that will lead us to at least 3 and maybe even up to 7 degrees warming.
One thing, though, Asad, and this is as much responsibility of us and the media as well, is that I think the discussion around climate change has changed. It is being reported a lot more. It's being reported as a current issue, as an emergency issue in many places as well. Do you think the importance is getting through to people now?
Well, I think there has been definitely a sea change in how the media reports, and I think there's a recognition that climate change is, of course, an extremely serious issue. And it's not an environment issue in the sense of it's something abstract from people. It will affect every person on this planet in one way or another. But I don't think we've really got through to the policymakers. I think the policymakers are still think that we can continue to business as usual and tweak around the edges, and something will happen that will prevent the worst impacts of climate change. And I think the evidence, as we see around the world, of killer floods, droughts, famines, shows that that's not happening. Actually, these impacts are happening now. Unfortunately, most of those impacts happen to the poorest people first, so the ones who are the least responsible. So I don't think that the countries most responsible for the economic powerhouses of the world that are most responsible are the ones that are really serious at this moment about trying to make the drastic changes. The positive news, and I think increasingly we're seeing this with ordinary people recognising that by tackling climate change, we can also tackle many of the other world's problems. I just heard your piece earlier about Mexico and air pollution, where we talk about the fact that, you know, half the world's population live on less than $5 a day, or, you know, a third of the world still suffers from food issues. We can solve all those by having good policies on guaranteeing the right to food and fixing our broken economic system. So actually all of us can have a dignified life, and we can actually live in a much cleaner, fairer and a better world. The problem, of course, is there are large, powerful corporations that are making a hell of a lot of money at the moment from the fossil fuel economy and from our food industry, who don't want to change. And until we as ordinary citizens are mandating our politicians and political leaders to act with more urgency, I think it could be too little too late.
Oh dear. Always great to talk to you though, Asad. Thank you. Asad Rehman joining us today from Faro in Portugal.